Hey y'all, this is Miss Simon. So today we're going to be talking about food chains. And in order for you to understand food chains and how they work, you need to know some of the vocabulary or some of the words. So that's what we'll be going over today. The main thing, if we start with a preview, is that we have organisms. And under that title, we have two categories of organisms: producers and consumers. Consumers, there's three types: herbivores, omnivores, and carnivores. So you may have heard some of these words before. I want you to think about what you think they might mean. So organisms are just any living thing. So any plant, any animal, even little things that you can't see, like bacteria, those are organisms because they're living. So, what makes something living? Well, it's something that needs food to survive and it can reproduce. And reproduce means that it can have kids. So, sometimes it's weird to think of plants as living, but they do need food. Think about it. You have to put a plant in light and water it every day, and they can reproduce, and that's the seeds. So, baby plants are seeds. And then with animals, we can see it a lot easier. They eat food, we see them eating it, and they either have babies or they lay eggs that hatch into babies. So, an organism is any living thing from tiny little bacteria, birds, bees. They can be big animals like zebras and dogs, and they can also include plants like trees and flowers. So, under the category of organisms, one type is producers. Producers make their own food because producers are plants. Plants get their energy from the sun, and plants can include lots of things. So, many times when we think of plants, we just think of flowers, but it also includes the food that we eat, the fruits and vegetables, grass, trees. And if you think about it, when you go to the grocery store and you go to the produce section, what do you see in the produce section? You see fruits and veggies. And the reason why we call them produce is because they are producers. So when you eat broccoli or an apple or strawberries or corn, all of these are types of plants, which are types of producers because they produce or make their own food. The other kind of organisms are called consumers. And when you consume, that means you take something or you get something. So consumers have to take or get their energy from other things. They don't make their own food. They have to eat stuff for food. And so there's three kinds of consumers: herbivores, omnivores, and carnivores. Herbivores only eat plants. For example, a giraffe. Some other herbivores might be insects that will eat nectar from plants like bees, or butterflies, they eat leaves. Cows, they eat grass. So if it only eats plants, it's called an herbivore. And you can remember that by the prefix herb. So herbs are things like cilantro or rosemary or oregano, and those are all types of plants. They look like little leaves, right? So herbivores eat leaves or things kind of like leaves. So any plants. Then on the opposite side, we have carnivores, which eat other animals. So sometimes we call them meat eaters because they're eating other animals. And one of the biggest examples is a tiger, right? It might eat a whole antelope. Dogs are carnivores, sharks are carnivores, um, but also like birds could be carnivores because they eat worms or insects. So it doesn't have to be big animals in order for it to be called a carnivore. It just has to eat another animal. And then somewhere in the middle, oh, one more thing about carnivores. If you've ever had carne asada, or if you know anything about Spanish, carne means meat. So you can see in this prefix, carn, we have that carn prefix, which means meat. So that's one way to remember that carnivores eat meat or they eat other animals. And then the omnivore eats both. They eat plants sometimes, they eat animals sometimes. So we humans are actually omnivores because we can eat salads and we can eat steaks. So another example of an omnivore would be a bear because bears might eat berries and nuts and other plants, but this bear here is hunting for fish. So right now he's in meat eating mode. But these are all of the kinds of consumers. And so a consumer has to eat other things for food, which is different from producers, which make their own food. So we talked about all of this vocabulary because it relates to food chains. So let's talk about what a food chain is. A food chain is a drawing or an illustration of how energy gets passed from one organism to another. And remember, organism means living thing. So every food chain starts with the sun. The sun gives its energy to a plant or producer, and then the producer gives its energy to some other organism, some type of consumer. In this case, it's giving its energy to the bee, which is an herbivore, because it's getting its energy from a plant. Bees only eat plants, they don't eat other animals. And whenever we read food chains, the arrows, whenever we see the arrow, we should say to ourselves, gives energy to. So this shows us how energy flows through an ecosystem. So to wrap everything up, these are the words that we learned today. Um, let's go back to that. Hmm. So the words that we learned today are organisms, which just means any living thing. So that can be plants, animals, insects, grass, fruits and veggies, right? All of these things are living things, and they're called organisms. So underneath that, we have producers and consumers. Producers are the plants, consumers are the animals. Producers produce their own food. Consumers consume their food. They have to eat other things. And there's three types of consumers: herbivores, which only eat plants, carnivores, which only eat other animals, and omnivores, which eat plants and animals. So that's your introduction. I hope you learned something. And there's so much more to learn about food chains. So get ready.